Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to our live class today in explearning Academy. And our topic is on succinct communication, how brevity can help us, how it's essential, in fact, for effective communication in professional contexts, as well as in social context, because we talk about social fluency as well, not just business place and workplace communication. So I would love for you to say one thing you're excited about to learn in this webinar, in this live class on succinct communication. And I'm really excited to share this topic because I think it really does help you level up in your careers and in your social lives as well. Of course, today our focus is professional development and business communication. But like I said, you can easily transfer what I'm going to teach you today into your casual conversations, your social lives. Boosting social fluency is something that we care a lot about as well. So, hi everybody. I want to welcome you to this webinar, like I said at the beginning, and I am so excited to be hosting this live class to help you enhance your communication skills, your social fluency, your executive communication, your executive presence. And like I said, it's important for not just workplace communication, but also your social lives. So as the executive communication coach here in explearning Academy and as the head instructor, I am passionate about, empowering you to connect with confidence and clarity across all types of social interactions, whether they be at work or in life in general. And as far as my background goes, I have nearly 2 decades of experience in international corporate communications, television, education, ed tech, and live broadcasting. And I have earned degrees in French and communication. That was my undergrad. And I have 2 masters, one from Bachiller University and the other from Columbia University in New York City. And so for the past 16 or so years, almost 2 decades now, I have had such a privilege and such a joy teaching communication, social skills, English, French, executive communication, executive coaching, and I'm constantly exploring how technology and research and, new emergent technology and trends and proven methods can help you achieve your communication goals, because that is what I've dedicated most of my professional career to, because I think it is that important. I also, my first kind of experience going, working in the international sphere was really, it stems from my Fulbright teaching award and grant. And that really set the stage for and the groundwork for cross-cultural and intercultural communication that I bring into my executive coaching, because it is, so important to be able to fluidly and fluently communicate across cultures and in between cultures, because we are a globalized world and it's only getting more so, which is amazing. So that experience, ignited a passion to weave intercultural standing into the courses, the web courses, the webinars, the YouTube videos and lessons, the Spotify episodes, and all of the courses and, materials that I've developed for my clients and students over the past 2 decades. And as a teacher trainer, I also equip fellow educators with the tools and strategies to foster confident and culturally aware communicators who can thrive in our interconnected world. So I'm really excited to present this topic today. Like I said, we're diving into succinct communication with a focus on business in the business world, business setting. And if you're ready to get started, we will go ahead with the presentation. I would love to see some activity in the chat. That's what this interactive chat's for. Of course, you will have the replay, so don't feel any pressure to take notes. I mean, if you can, if you want, of course, by all means, but I would really like for you to be, fully focused on this class, and then be able to communicate in the live chat. You can ask me questions. You can interact with other people who are in the chat along with us as well. So that's what that's there for. And if anybody wants to, give a thumbs up, please do so now. You're welcome to do that now and during the presentation as well. And like I said, make use of it. You can ask questions there, and I'll get to as many as I can, during the presentation, and we'll leave some time at the end if anybody has questions. Okay, so succinct communication. How many of you are familiar with this topic? By a show of hands, I would love to see, who's familiar with this topic. Have you heard anything about it? Have you thought about it at all? What are sort of your takeaways so far in terms of what that could mean, what it means for you, what that means for your business and professional life? So like I said, I mentioned at the beginning, brevity, the art of being succinct and not overly verbose and getting to the point, is really important in business communication because it helps you get to your point quickly. It helps you deliver your message with confidence and clarity and in the most effective and efficient way as possible, because time is money. People want to carry on with their day. They have a lot of things to do, lots of people to see, lots of things to accomplish. So time is money, right? And time is finite. So we have to be aware of that as well. Now, why is it so important? Well, it saves time, right? Time is money, like we said. It saves time both for the people who are sending that message, transmitting that message, and receiving that message. And it allows for, smoother communication and fewer delays, fewer instances where there might be a snafu or a misunderstanding. It also enhances clarity and focus because when you're concise, you cut through the clutter. You're able to really just get to the point, focus on the essential message, distill it into that most important point, and that will improve your clarity and then also the comprehension for people who are on the receiving end of that message, right? So Elizabeth says, I believe that succinct communication is very important when we work in companies and we need to communicate with management. Absolutely, absolutely, and the team, she said. So exactly, nail on the head right there, Elizabeth, exactly right. It is really important when interfacing with management as well as with your team, okay? So powerful, right? It's so powerful. The being as concise as you possibly can is actually a superpower, right? It cuts through the clutter. It makes your message more impactful, more memorable, right? It shows respect for the people's time, whether that be somebody reading your message or listening to it, and you avoid unnecessary words and phrases, right? You can strengthen your message. You can eliminate or avoid confusion altogether, which then creates fewer cause for misunderstandings, which is good. And it also leaves a lasting impression. So people remember you well, and your ideas become more front and center for people. And they might even associate your great idea with you, right? Which you might think, oh, that, of course they're going to do that, but not necessarily, right? They might think of an idea, but not necessarily pair that with you. But if you are concise and clear in delivering your message, then it's more likely that they're going to pair that amazing idea that you shared in that meeting with you. So leaving a lasting, memorable impression. Good. So when we're thinking about eliminating unnecessary words, I want you to take stock of, how you speak in general. Do you put a lot of filler in there? Is there anything in excess that you feel like maybe you can eliminate? Of course, I don't want to say we all, but many of us use filler words, right? And sometimes it's not just the filler words like right? These discourse markers, but rather it can be just extra words in general. And so when we're thinking about eliminating these unnecessary words, hold on one sec, okay? That's fine. think about all of your words, right? In communication, analyze what you're saying. What are some of the, things you're sharing with people? What is it that you're saying? Does it contribute to the overall meaning and message? If it's not that important, then you can eliminate it. It's not necessary. In terms of concise language, what is the shortest way you can say what you want to say, right? What is the most, essentially the shortcut, right? And shortcuts in general get a bad rap, right? But in this sense, you want to think of what is the most impactful way I can say what I want to say with as few words as possible. So take those long, lengthy phrases and try to turn them into more succinct phrasing. Use strong verbs. Use the active voice as opposed to the passive voice, right? It shows agency, and it's also going to be easier for you to convey what you want to say with fewer words. And then remove the clutter. So get rid of any redundant phrasing, any repetition, any jargon that might be distracting or confusing. And you want to be as direct and clear as possible, right? So these are some of the things I want you to think about. And like I said, take stock of your own communication. How are you relaying your message to people, both written and spoken? So when you think about structuring impactful messages, the first thing you want to think about is organization, right? Is your message logical? What's your main point, your thesis, your overarching theme? And then do you have any subsequent points after that that can support that overarching theme or, thesis or main point, right? What's the data that can back it up? Concise language, right? So that will help you eliminate wordiness. Like I said, strong verbs, active voice, eliminate the fluff. And this comes with practice, of course. Have a strong opening. What's your hook? How can you grab the audience? How can you capture their attention? What will you do to set the tone? What kind of tone do you want to set for your message? Right? These are important things to think about before you even open your mouth to speak or before you even send that email, right? It's easier to revise what you're going to say when you have written text. But I also want you to think about this when you speak, right? You can organize these thoughts in your mind, thinking before speaking. So things to keep in mind. And then what's your call of action, right? What do you want the reader or the listener or the interlocutor, right, the people you're communicating with, what do you want them to do? What's the desired outcome? What should they do? Should they send a follow-up email to you? Should they meet you for coffee in 2 weeks? Should they report back by end of day? What is it that you want them to do? Okay? And make sure that's clear, because if it's not clear, there's going to be confusion. And then it's you might think you were clear about what you wanted, but they might have an entirely different understanding of what you want them to do. Now, in terms of email, right, think about your subject line, right? Make it concise. Don't be verbose in your subject header. Make sure that this is to the point. It's it sets the tone for the email, and it's not any clickbait or anything like that, because you want to make sure that they open it and it's not considered spam. Content needs to be focused, right? So don't put 10 things in there that you need. Keep it, distill it to the most salient points or point. So a single topic is even better, right? You don't want there to be any confusion. You don't want to go into this whole spiel about 10 other things. You want it to be very easy to understand. And then, of course, if you have more to say, you might turn that email into a face-to-face meeting over coffee or lunch, or just face-to-face in an office setting, because chances are if you have more than one item that you want to address, it should be taken off email and off Slack and now into a face-to-face meeting, or even a phone call or a video call. So That's really what we want to think about. And then keep your tone professional, right? Think about your language register, use proper grammar, avoid slang, avoid informal language. Think about how can you set that professional tone. And in one of our group or executive coaching sessions the other day, we were talking about balancing assertiveness and politeness and being kind. And one of the things that the member brought up was that, she realized that now in this new leadership position, she would be eliminating emojis and exclamation points, being mindful of that. So that's exactly right? How do we keep the tone professional so that we can assert ourselves, be taken seriously, keep things, professional, and make sure that there's no confusion in regards to that, right? And then when you have an email, you're able to proofread. So before you send, read it. I had a communication professor back in college say, when we were submitting our dissertations, our senior year theses, the thesis, right at the end of the year, she would say, and these are like 100 pages, she would say, read it out loud. That way you will notice any grammatical errors or mistakes or typos. So can you imagine reading 100 pages out loud? Well, I did that, and I also did it for my French thesis, which was another 100 pages, and that was in French. But believe me, it works. So with an email, we're talking about, not too long, because again, you're keeping it concise and to the point. So read it out loud. And that way you can make sure that there are no errors, or you minimize the risk of errors in there. Okay. And then in terms of succinct presentations, visuals are really great. People should lean more heavily on visuals because they can, especially if you've got to choose the right visual though, right? That will help you convey your ideas. Use clear and concise visuals that will enhance your understanding and engagement of the audience. And it's also, more fun to look at in a lot of ways. And they could be visuals like the ones I have here, right? Not just the images that I'm sharing with you that you'll see throughout the presentation, but also little icons and things like that as well. So, thinking about that, time management, try to time it when you know how long it's going to take you, give or take. Keep it focused. Make sure that you've really meticulously planned each slide and all the content and anticipated any questions and how much time you would probably spend on each of these questions. So these are things to think about when you are carefully crafting your presentation. Also, audience engagement, right? How can you convey the message to the audience and keep them engaged and interested? That's very important too. So if it's a presentation, you might have an interactive chat like I do, or you might have, if you're in a room with people, you might call on people by name if you know that they have something to offer and they have something to share, or you might leave that to a Q&A and open the floor to questions at the end. So having an interactive component is really great, and that's why I keep saying use the chat. Let's talk in the chat. So I see Elizabeth has another point here, which is great. So she says, for me, it's very challenging to be able to have concise communication when we have to communicate in another language. Absolutely. So for my multilingual friends out there, I myself am multilingual, it is important to think about, okay, how can I convey this message in my L2, which is any other language after your L1 native language, in a way that's going to be succinct and concise. So that's an extra kind of layer at the advanced level that you have to think about. So absolutely, it is a challenge, 100%. And the only way to get better at this is through practice and, being mindful of the strategies that I'm sharing with you. Good. Also with your slides and, your visual aids and things like that, try to minimize clutter on a page because that can get distracting. Sometimes we put too much text on a slide. It happens. There's a lot you want to say, a lot you want to convey, but bullet points or clear visuals, like small paragraphs with, the way I've outlined it here, for example, can really help the, people in that presentation, engage in that presentation, take in that content and understand it and process that information. Good. So those are some of the things for emails and for presentations. And what about meetings? Let's look at meetings. Sip of water, always a good idea. Okay, so time is precious, right? Time is finite. We'll never get it back, so we have to make the best use of our time, which is why I'm so grateful to you that you're here joining me for this live class. But anyway, so team meetings, we all know that they're essential for collaboration, for rapport building within the team, but they can easily become time consuming and take up more time than maybe is necessary or more time than you've actually allotted. So have an agenda, right? Have clear, an agenda, and if that's printed out or emailed to people ahead of time, that would be greatly appreciated. Be as concise as you can so that you can prioritize the top items on the agenda and keep the meetings focused. Don't go off on tangents, as much fun as it might be. Save that for the coffee chats that you'll have with your colleagues or the lunches or whatever. But in the meeting, you really want to respect people's time, keep it focused so you can be as efficient as possible. Set a clear agenda, right? Make sure that that's either handed out, printed out for people and handed out to everybody at the start of the meeting or ahead of the meeting. Maybe you email it to them and you make sure everyone has an idea of what the meeting's going to be about so that everyone's on track and you hold each other accountable, right? And that way you don't go on these tangential, side quests, because while it is fun, to the degree that what you're talking about is fun, it's not always the best idea, right? And then active listening, super important, as we know. You can't have proper effective communication without it. It promotes not only understanding, but also it prevents unnecessary repetition. So you don't find yourself repeating what you just said, or, unless you're really driving home a point, that's separate. But you want to be able to summarize key points, ask clarifying questions, give people the chance to process that information, elaborate when necessary, and that way you can, have this really solid communication foundation. So the active listening should never, ever be overlooked. It's very important. It's a two-way street communication, right? There's listening and there's speaking. And we have to make sure that we're doing both of these things. Okay. So elevator pitch. You can be succinct with your elevator pitch. In fact, you should be. Make sure that you prepare your message ahead of time, right? Craft a concise and compelling statement that really encapsulates your core value prop and key benefits and any type of data that you are hoping to share as well. And then of course, practice makes progress. So you've got to practice, make sure that it flows nicely and smoothly. So you want to be able to be confident as you articulate it, within that time limit. Because again, with an elevator pitch, you don't have a ton of time. You don't have a ton of time. It's designed to be brief, right? Brevity is your friend. So make sure that you are practicing it. You want to engage your audience, right? Create eye contact, build rapport, have a positive tone, positive body language, a soft smile on your face. Make sure that you tailor the message to match the audience and what their needs are and any questions they have so that it resonates, right? They find it relatable. They find it interesting. They want to listen. They want to know more. They want to ask questions. They want to follow up, right? So you leave a lasting impression this way, especially when you end with a call to action. Okay, so that's that compelling statement. That's the action that you want them to do that encourages some sort of follow-up, a continuation of the conversation. And it also creates that intrigue, right? It piques their interest. It wants them, you get them to want to know more. So maybe they request a lunch. Maybe they, want you to come into their office and pitch even more, right? So make sure that call to action is very clear. And again, that comes at the end. So with taking a complex idea and communicating it as simply as possible, this is a lot harder than it seems, right? And for anyone who's ever done this or attempted it, you might say, wow, how am I going to take this gigantic, gargantuan topic and distill it into the most simple terms as possible? So here are some tips for you. So break it down, right? Make it into the, the smallest possible parts. So how can you take this big idea and turn it into easy to understand pieces? Using storytelling is highly effective for this. So having analogies, relatable stories, this can make it a lot easier to take something very complex and distill it into these easier bite-sized chunks for people to grasp and digest. Visual aids, again, we have here because, some people are visual learners, some people are visual communicators, and you want to be able to bring those people in, those learners in, those types of communicators in, because it can help to have charts and diagrams and graphs and images and even nice word art or logos or icons, because that can help simplify, more complex information, especially if you're explaining like a process, right? If you're explaining a process, you might have these like a progression like I had here with the elevator pitch, right? Very similar. Like this is very visually enticing. So it doesn't always have to be beautiful images, although I'm a big fan of that too. It can be, it doesn't have to be that, right? It doesn't have to be that. And then have a dialogue. Try to make it as interactive as possible, right? Do you have an interactive chat? Do you have a Q&A at the end? Are you asking questions during your presentation or during your meeting? What does that look like? I want you to think about ways of bringing the audience in as well. So speaking of bringing the audience in, how are we doing so far? How are we doing so far? Let me know so far one maybe surprise thing that you've learned in this live class so far, or a question you might have that we can chat about now or later. So let me know in the chat. Let me know in the chat. Okay. Sometimes we have a tendency to over-explain things, right? It's kind of like over-communicating on something. Now, this happens, especially if you're very passionate about the subject that you want to share, or you have a lot to say on the topic, or you're just a talkative person by nature. All of the above can be, the reasons why. But become aware of it, right? If somebody has told you, okay, you don't need to over-explain this to me, or you don't need to over-communicate it, or I've got the picture, I've got the point, or just get to the point already. If people are saying stuff like that to you, take it as feedback, right? Take it as constructive criticism. So becoming aware is the very first kind of step, right? And then also innately, you might notice, right? We talk about intrapersonal communication as well. You might notice when you want to say more than is necessary. And again, this happens when you're maybe excited about something, or you're an expert, a subject matter expert on a certain topic, and you really want to share that. Just take it down a notch. Take a minute, think about it. Do you have to provide those details? So observe these kinds of communication patterns. When do you tend to be maybe overly explicative or overly explanatory? Who is it with? Why does it happen? You really have to start thinking about this in order to become more aware of it. And then embrace concise questions, right? So ask questions from your audience. This will help you to, refine your answers, prioritize what's most important. Maybe you frame questions so that they're more clear and they're more concise and they're more focused. And that way you can really think about, okay, well, how can I explain this in as short and as succinct a way as possible so that you don't just go on and on and on and on and on, even though it might be tempting for some. Okay. Active listening, huge one again. So with this, really thinking about your audience's responses. Can you gauge their understanding? Can you adjust your explanations according to their level of comprehension? Don't assume that they need more information. Don't assume that they're, waiting for that detail. They might not need that detail. If they do, they will ask you for it. They will ask you a follow-up question. They will ask you for clarification, for elaboration. So don't feel the need to just, word vomit everywhere. Try to take in what they're saying, what they're asking, and then tailor the message and be as succinct as you can. And then always seeking feedback. That's a huge one. People will not necessarily give it to you always, but if you can get it, that's great. This will, help you refine your message, and the insights can help you identify areas for improvement and maybe even gauging their interest for future meeting topics or whatever it is, presentations, webinars, anything. So things to keep in mind, right? This will help you overcome that urge to over-explain. So to balance brevity and to balance clarity, here are two things that you can do, right? First, you want to make sure that your message is easily understood. So choose words that are precise, they're to the point, they're not going to be misunderstood or misinterpreted, meaning they're not ambiguous. So it's much better to use a few more words than to sacrifice clarity. Okay, so yes, we're talking about succinctness, but it's okay to use just a few more words that you need instead of sacrificing on clarity, because when you sacrifice clarity, then you open up the room, you open up the space for, misinterpretation, which can lead to misunderstanding, which can lead to conflict, which can lead to a whole slew of issues, not to mention delays. Misunderstandings can be costly for the company, right? They're expensive. So things to think about. And what brevity does is it helps to make your message digestible, right? The people can process it. They can digest it. So take a big step back and think about, okay, what is my core message? What am I trying to say? What is my big picture? And then remove all of the filler and eliminate unnecessary words and details and explanations and all of the, tangential side quests and things like that, because they don't add value. If they add value, then they're part of your core message. You need to keep them in there. But if they're extraneous details and information, then leave it out. If it's so important, someone will ask you, right? More than one person will ask you. And that's also where that feedback comes in, because you get to say, okay, was there anything here that was unclear? Or I would love to hear from you. Or you give them like a little survey at the end, whatever it might be. If you see that the same question is being brought up or the same details are being requested, then that tells you, okay, I need to add this to my core message. This was a question that a lot of people had. So that's how you also can incorporate feedback for your next iterations of the whatever it is that you're sharing of that message, even if it's your elevator pitch, right? So things to think about. Okay. When we talk about writing style, it's always better to be as concise as we can, because again, time is money, time is finite. It's important for all of us, right? So be, a stickler about revising and editing your work, right? Revise your elevator pitch, revise your LinkedIn profile header, whatever, resume. Remove any redundant words, any unnecessary words, phrases. Just really focus on the core message and on the clarity and conciseness of that message. As I said before, I've done this myself many times. I continue to do it. Read aloud, right? Read your writing aloud so that you can catch any strange or awkward phrasing. You can see if there are any typos in there, any repetition that doesn't need to be there, any redundancies. This will help you identify areas for improvement. Yes, it can be time consuming, but it's much better to, what is the saying? Measure twice, cut once, right? That way, you have a beautiful piece of fabric. You're about to design a gorgeous suit, and you want to make sure that you've got the measurements right. So you're going to measure twice and you're going to cut once so that you don't waste that fabric. Same thing with this. Seek feedback, right? Ask for people's opinion on your writing, on, your elevator pitch, on your email, whatever it is. And you can get, gain a lot from learning their perspective and learning their insights as well. And don't get, self-conscious about it. Feedback is very important. It's instrumental. So take it as constructive criticism. Don't expect people to just, sing your praises, because then that's not really the most effective feedback you can get. And you also might be wondering, well, is this real feedback or are they just trying to butter me up? So you really want to, seek out feedback from people that are going to give you honest feedback. When we're talking about streamlining our writing, always use the active voice because it's more clear and concise. Passive voice can be wordy, it can be ambiguous. So this is in the American cultural context, right? And in the business setting, we like to use active voice. Some other cultures tend to use more passive voice. There's maybe more saving face components in there. That's a whole separate, topic that has to do with intercultural and cross-cultural communications. But in the American context and in the business setting, we want to be as clear and concise as possible. So you want to use the active voice. Concise, right? So shorter ways of saying something. Use words that carry a lot of clout, a lot of impact, a lot of gravitas. So those weaker verbs, get rid of them. Strong verbs can stay. These add clarity, they add action to your writing and to your speaking, quite frankly, right? They color it in a really beautiful way. So how can you avoid these weak words and add that add unnecessary length and instead prioritize the strong verbs? And then, of course, edit, revise for clarity and conciseness. So take time to proofread. Like I said, read it out loud or give it to a friend to read if you just can't look at that anymore. Maybe take some time, take some space away from it. So you write whatever it is, you iterate it on it. And then the next day you look at it. That could also give you some fresh perspective on whatever you're writing as well. This goes for both written and spoken communication. You want to avoid jargon, avoid technical language that, people are not going, your audience is not going to understand. So if you're talking to a group of engineers and you're an engineer, then you can keep some of that technical engineer language. If you are talking to a group of sales professionals, salespeople, and you have a background in, architecture, you're going to have different types of jargon. So it's not necessarily going to be the same type of jargon. So in that case, you want to avoid it. So you have to speak their language, right? And I'm not talking about English, French, Spanish, not languages like that. I'm talking about technical language, industry-wide knowledge, technical terms, acronyms. And if you want to use them, then you have to define them. That's the rule of thumb. Because otherwise it will alienate your listeners. They're going to zone out. They're going to, just fade away, zone out if they don't understand the terminology. Because it kind of like creates this air of exclusion, and we don't want that. We're trying to be inclusive. We're trying to make sure everybody understands the message. So this is why it's important to speak in a way that everyone is going to understand you, right? The technical terms only can be used if everybody knows the definition of these terms. If it's specialized language, right? Engineering language, fashion language, photography language, industry-wide knowledge. If you're talking to a group of industry-wide experts and you're an industry-wide expert, then you will have the same specialized language, the same technical term. In that case, fine, use it, but still define it. 'Cause just in case you have somebody in the audience who's not part of that, you want to make sure that, that one person is still included in the conversation. When in doubt, err on the side of caution in terms of your jargon and technical language. So if there's another better way to say it that's clear and straightforward that you can avoid jargon, go with that, right? Be straightforward, be, direct about it so that everybody can understand. And then always, 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 you want to tailor your message to the target audience. So who is your audience? Who are you talking to? What are their needs? What are their expectations? Because this is going to help you tailor your message for maximum impact. It's going to resonate the best with them, right? The same message can be said a million different ways. So what way do you want to say that? That's going to be based on your audience. Who are they? Then you craft your message. You craft, the language, the tone, examples, the storytelling, the visual aids, whatever it is that resonate with your audience and convey the message in the best way possible. And then when you deliver your message, you want to be mindful of your audience's preferences, right? How do they communicate? Is it more of a direct way? Is it more indirect? Do they like storytelling? Do they like visual aids? So try to get some information about your audience ahead of time, if possible. If it's your team members that you're talking to in a meeting, then you probably know them very well, and you already know sort of their communication styles and preferences, and you've had one-on-ones with them, and you're already quite familiar with them as they are with you. So that's always a plus. But this gets a little bit more tricky when you don't know who your audience is. Like, sometimes when TED Talk speakers go on stage, they might not necessarily have the information about the audience, or it doesn't even have to be a TED Talk, as big as that. It can just be, you're giving a speech at, a certain venue with a certain group of people. Before you create your speech and your talk, think about who are these people? Who am I talking to? Who's my audience? What do they need? What are their expectations? What do they want? How can I be helpful to them? How can I deliver value to them? And try to get that information ahead of time. That will serve you well. It will serve you really well. Okay. When we want to talk about, succinct communication, we also have to think about active listening, right? So you want to practice active listening. We have a whole course about active listening in our community in Explearning Academy. It's part of our communication boot camp. So this is something that I encourage everybody really work on, active listening, because again, it's something that gets neglected a lot of times. A lot of times people say, I want to get better at communication, yet they don't realize that they also need to improve their active listening. So give the speaker your full attention, give the listener your full attention. But when you're talking about active listening in this context, we're thinking about the speaker, right? So, minimize distractions, silence your phone notifications, your watch notifications, don't interrupt or think about what you're going to say next when you're having a meeting with somebody, or you're in a small group setting and there's one, somebody's talking and you're all turn taking, right? How can you listen to them in a way that you're truly listening without, thinking about how you're going to impress them with what you're going to say next? Thinking about also their nonverbals, right? So not just the words, the tone of voice, the paralinguistics, the body language, the facial expressions, the micro expressions, like I said, tone of voice, the pacing, the rhythm, what's the context of the conversation? Did their pacing change? Did their tone change? What's their inflection pattern like? Are they distracted? What's their overall kind of like vibe? And then asking clarifying questions. So don't be afraid to say, okay, I don't really understand that, or could you explain this a little bit more? This shows that you're interested. It shows that you're engaged. It shows that you're, on the same page as they are, and you want to be on the same page, because that's, how you move forward in the conversation. That's how you build rapport. That's how you create trust with each other. And then from time to time, you want to summarize, you want to reflect, maybe interject with a summary or something that, maybe an insight that you had, or a eureka moment or a revelatory moment. and you can reflect on, what the speaker is feeling, what they're saying, validate them if necessary, acknowledge their perspective in as many ways as possible, because they'll appreciate it. And again, that's going to create stronger rapport between the two of you. And they will also return the favor, right? They will also do that to you and with your communication too, which is what we want. Pausing is great, okay? Pausing is great. It helps you, well, it does so many things. So it can be very powerful, right? It can help the listener process information. It can help them reflect. It can help them understand what you said and what you're both saying, and use it strategically, right? Use it to eliminate fillers, use it to enhance clarity, use it to increase engagement, emphasize important points before or after. And you put a pause in there and then say something important, or you put a pause in there after you said something, that you highlighted. So silence doesn't have to be scary. You don't have to worry about there being like gaps in speech. It helps to elevate our communication to a brand new level of effectiveness. So when we're thinking about executive communication, put those pauses in there. Okay, pause. Is anyone uncomfortable with pausing? Because I've had many students and clients who've, felt like they've had to just constantly fill the air with chatter. If you are, uncomfortable with it, you're not alone, but it is a very important communication tactic. And like I said, when used strategically, it goes a long way. So I'm just curious, is anybody out there kind of uncomfortable with pausing in your own experience? Let me know in the chat. Let me know in the chat. Okay, very good. Nonverbal communication, another huge topic. We cannot be effective communicators without it. We've got another web course about this in our community in explearning Academy. So definitely something that I encourage everybody to take really seriously. So it can dramatically influence your message, and not just your message and how you're conveying it, but also how people receive it. So your micro expressions, your body language, your posture, your tone, these are all paralinguistics, and they're all part of the nonverbal communication, which are crucial for not only conveying your message, but also creating rapport, building your credibility, building your authority. And you have to really think about alignment, right? So your nonverbals and your verbals are matching. So in other words, they're not mismatched. In other words, when somebody asks you, okay, very simple example, if you say, how are you? And somebody says, I'm fine, right? And they have like a sad face. Or how are you? And they're like, I'm great. I'm really great. I'm really, really great. And they're like stressed and like freaking out, but they have a smile. That's mismatched, right? So you don't believe it. You don't know if you trust the nonverbal or the verbal. It's like a mixed message being sent out there. But however, when they're aligned, which is what we want, verbal and nonverbal match up, you are credible, you are confident, you are trustworthy, you're not being inconsistent with your message. It's very clear, how you are behaving, right? So very important to think about this alignment between verbal and nonverbal communication. Good. So we can't talk about this without talking about, cultural differences in communication. Like I mentioned at the very beginning, we're a globalized society. We communicate across cultures and in between cultures, and we have to be aware of these cultural differences as well. So there's going to be cultural nuances across communication because different cultures have different ways of communicating. Some cultures are more direct, some are indirect, some have certain treatments of nonverbal cues, of language use, of etiquette, of pacing, you name it. So being really aware of this is important. building understanding too, right? So being empathetic, trying to put yourself in their shoes, trying to give people the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, I wonder if I misinterpreted that, or asking them, this is how I do it in my culture. Is it the same in your culture? Or please tell me more about that, right? How do you make eye contact in your culture? Things like that, right? Because this is going to help you foster empathy, and it will facilitate more effective communication across cultures and in between cultures. And then, of course, respecting differences, because, of course, there are going to be differences, and you've got to you've got to respect them, right? So being open-minded, having an open mind, right? Having a growth mindset, not being judgmental, trying to be, positive, validate, be empathetic. This is going to be really important. And also having that willingness to learn and say, I would love to know more about that. Really having that curiosity, that curious mindset. It's a very positive way of creating rapport with people and getting to know them and showing that you're engaged and you're all ears and you really want to know more and learn more because you care. So communication, I've mentioned this many times in different live classes and webinars and lessons. We have to have a flexible approach to communication, right? There's no one size fits all. There's no one way of communicating, even within ourselves, right? We have different styles. We have to adapt. So, thinking about also not only adapting to different audiences, but to different mediums, right? So when you write for digital, like online content, that's going to be more concise. It might be more scannable text, shorter paragraphs, subheadings, thinking about newsletters or your tweets or your X's, and what are we saying these days? I don't know. Your LinkedIn post, your your Slack messages, your emails. These are going to be more succinct, right? Going to be scannable. You can read it. The TLDRs, too long didn't reads. When you're speaking at presentations, right, that's going to be more engaging. You're going to have clear visuals, clear transitions, strong images, maybe some graphs and charts and diagrams that we talked about, so that the audience is more active, right? And try to rehearse it. You don't want to sound stiff and robotic, but you want to, you want to know what you're saying. You want to know what the content is, what you're sharing with people, and then adapt your tone, adapt the message according to the situation. If you have questions that you're, getting from the audience, address those questions during or at the end, right? So these are important ways of adding that into your presentations. And then with email, similar to writing in digital, you want to be concise, focus on the main point. Do you have a clear subject? Do you have bullet points that might facilitate, clarity and whatnot, just to make it more readable, right? To have people, have an easier time understanding. And then in meetings, also got to be succinct. Do you have those agenda meeting notes out there? Are you able to actively listen, be concise? Responses are really important when you're being concise with responses as well, not just questions. And then provide relevant information. Don't go off on a tangent. If you want to go off on a tangent, schedule a lunch or a coffee and do it on your own dime. But essentially in a meeting, right, we want to be respectful of everyone's time. Of course, in one-on-ones too, but with a meeting, you have more moving parts there. So with visuals, what's an effective way? Well, you want to try to make them as engaging as possible, make them relevant to the content, right? Images, graphs, charts, taking these complex ideas and highlighting the key points through visuals, because those are memorable. People often remember images, not necessarily, the text, but they'll remember images a lot of times, right? We still remember images that's really stuck with us throughout our lives. Visceral images, poignant images, iconic images. So choose wisely, right? They have to be clear, aesthetically appealing, relevant, right? I mean, I have a graph here. I have a picture here of a visual, right? It's not of, a parking lot. If I had a picture of a parking lot, You might be like, MD, why do you have a picture of a parking lot there? What is that? What is that about? Is that relevant? It would not be relevant. So don't make people guess. There's ways of being edgy and avant-garde if that's what you want to do, but in a professional presentation, you really want to be, to the point as well, right? And then with our verbal communication, again, active listening pops up. What are people saying? Not just their words, but how are they saying it with their body language, with their tone of voice, with their expressions? Choose your words as carefully as you can. How do you do this? You think before you speak. You have an outline in your mind. Like, what am I going to say? I have a skeleton image of what I'm going to say. An outline, a skeleton outline. Think about your tone. What kind of tone do you want to strike? Choice of words, your vocabulary, your phrasing, your terminology. What kind of impact is it going to have? And then the questions, right? You might ask some comprehension questions. You might ask some questions from the audience. They might ask you some questions. Seek feedback when necessary. And that brings me to this point, right? Again, that feedback component comes in. Again, people will not always give you feedback, but when they do, take it, embrace it, and be happy that they did. Even if it's not the type of feedback that you were hoping for, it's still valuable information. It's still really good to have, okay? And then use it, right? Make sure that it comes up in the next iteration of your elevator pitch, of your email, of your proposal, of your pitch, of your presentation, whatever it might be, have it, in there. Editing and proofreading, we talked about this. Spot your errors. So this is important, right? You want to think about typos, grammatical errors, inconsistencies, unclear wording. To do this, say it out loud. It really helps. Trust me. And if you just are really tired of reading your own writing, take a break, take a step back, revisit the next day or even the next week. When you think about, having a critical eye, this is sometimes really difficult to do as, being critical of yourself. You might just not see it. So then you might give it to a friend or a colleague or a mentor. But if you can do it yourself, like read it actively, right? Try to focus on the flow, the progression, the clarity, accuracy, and then ask yourself, do I need this sentence? Is this really important? Are there any factual errors there? Anything like illogical? Any stylistic issues? Am I using active voice as opposed to passive voice, right? So having this conversation is really important. And then setting up a systematic approach. So thinking about your proofreading, being consistent about that, maybe taking that step back, like I said, using a checklist, tools to enhance your accuracy, going through it as many times as you can, because this is going to help you improve your writing and also your speaking. And there we have the feedback component again. Sometimes you might have overlooked something, so it's always good to have another critical eye, objective hopefully, who can help and point out anything that you might have missed, right? Even if you've proofread it 5 times, it happens. Always feedback for continuous improvement, right? This is really important. Like I said, people are not always going to give you feedback for whatever reason, but when you get it, embrace it and use it and implement it. And it's a great idea to track your communication successes and challenges. So you might have a nice spreadsheet. You might have, just a note-taking app on your phone where you keep track of all of these things. This is really great because it helps you have that. What it does is it helps build that self-awareness that you can have in situ, like in the moment of your communication, but also afterwards. So you kind of analyze, okay, what went really well in that? What could I have done better? What would I have done differently? What would have been, what can be improved? Because this is going to help us grow and it's going to help us get better at what we want to do. And that's really how we learn, right? We iterate on the process. Okay, so when we're thinking about cultivating a culture of succinct communication, what you want to do is create that open dialogue, right? Foster a culture where people have, they feel comfortable. They have that psychological safety where they can, feel safe and secure, and they can share their thoughts and express their ideas concisely and provide constructive feedback without any penalty, really, or judgment being passed. So that really boils down to the psychological safety component. And then as a manager, as a leader, you want to lead by example. So you should champion concise communication so that people then also see, okay, wow, this is a great example. This is how I should communicate. I want to be also a great active listener. I want to be able to do that. So you model that communication in your interactions with your team members, in your meetings, when you're communicating upward with C-suite and stakeholders and things like that. You want to lead by example. Very important. Structure your communication, right? Have these clear guidelines for your meetings, for your presentations, which emphasizes brevity and focus, and you eliminate those tangents. You say, let's get back on track here. I know everyone's excited about the upcoming holiday weekend. Let's say there's an upcoming holiday weekend, but let's get on track and we can talk about our plans at the pizza party on Friday. Something like that, right? You don't have to be rude about it, but just make sure that everybody's aware, right? And then have these training and development opportunities for people. Workshops, training programs. This is going to help employees, equipping them with the skills to communicate effectively and succinctly. And I know just the platform, it's called explearning Academy. So you can definitely check that out, especially if, you want training and workshops. We have it all. We have it all. Okay, let's take a look at a case study where we see brevity in action in a successful way. So we have this company, it's a made-up company that I just came up with, Global Tech Solutions, okay? And the challenge is inefficient communication in leadership team meetings, okay? So the background, Global Tech Solutions, which is a leading tech firm, faced a significant challenge with long, unfocused leadership team meetings. So tangents, storytelling, side quests, side conversations, the whole shebang. Executives often provided lengthy updates, which led to confusion, misalignment, decision-making delays, which cost the company money and time, and it started to hinder project timelines and the overall productivity. So not great. So what was the solution? The company's CEO, recognizing the need for change, implemented a new strategy focused on succinct communication. So now all executives were required to adopt a brief, structured format for updates following a 3-step rule. Okay, just 3 steps. So what are they? Main point. And guess what? You can use this framework in your own meetings. That's a plus. Main point, you state the key message or the decision needed. Okay, second, supporting data, right? Share only the most important metrics, data, facts, numbers, percentages. Okay, 3, what's the call to action? So what is the next step or decision that we need to make, right? What's required? So that's it. The main point, the supporting data, and the call to action. 3-step rule. So then the leadership team also began using concise language in emails and presentations, making sure that they got straight to the point without dilly-dallying, and there were clear objectives and minimal jargon. So people didn't have to say, okay, well, what does this mean? What is that acronym? What is that, short for? None of that, because that wastes time. That brings us to the results. So what happened? Well, meeting efficiency. Meetings were reduced by 40% in duration. That's almost half, right? Can you imagine? Amazing. With executives reporting higher engagement and faster decision-making, right? Decision-making is one of the top priorities, top characteristics of good decision-making, fast decision-making with managers and executives. So there was also clarity and focus, clear communication, Everyone knew what was expected of them, what they could expect. This led to fewer follow-up meetings, so they didn't have to schedule a time to then clarify and figure out, alignment. There was already a significant increase in alignment across departments, right? So that's a huge step forward. And then improved productivity, right? So with meetings taking less time and email communication becoming more focused, people know exactly what's needed of them and the expectations of theirs. The executives actually had more time to do what they do best, which is on strategic tasks, which leads to a 15% increase in project completion rates. Another huge, amazing result, right? All with this brevity and succinctness and this 3-step rule. So I want you to take that, into your own lives. So because we embrace this brevity and this clarity, the Global Tech Solutions team was able to transform the leadership communication and drive clearer and greater efficiency across the organization. So what does this case study highlight? Well, it shows how concise, succinct communication not only saves time, which we know saves money, but it also fosters and promotes stronger decision-making and overall business success. So that's huge. That's a really big deal. Really big deal. So again, my friends, I want you to think about that 3-step rule. Again, these frameworks are just amazing because, as you see, they're not necessarily overly complicated. They're very to the point and they're malleable, and you can use them and implement them across various contexts. And then thinking about some of the challenges with brevity, because of course we might run into some challenges. Collaboration and feedback, right? So collaborating with colleagues and receiving feedback helps refine messages and ensure clarity, but you don't necessarily always get feedback. So don't be the one to wait on feedback. Proactively seek it out. Ask people for their feedback. Ask your team for feedback. Ask your higher ups for feedback. Resisting over explanation, right? It can be very challenging, especially when you have a lot to say, to over explain something. But try to resist the urge, right? Especially when you're dealing with a complex topic. Try to be as succinct as you can. And then find that balance, right? So find a way to be concise, but also a way to provide enough information and enough context that is important for decision making and for effective communication. But don't worry if you've kind of been too succinct sometimes, especially when you're working on this and you're trying to find that sweet spot, because people are going to ask you questions if they find that you're not providing enough information, or if they find they still have some questions. So don't be afraid to kind of underspeak, undershare, right? Under communicate in some contexts. That will help you kind of gauge what the sweet spot is. It's kind of an experiment that I want you to do a little bit to see what that balance is for you. So play around with it. Practice makes progress. Be consistent about it. Be disciplined about it. It takes time to be, have that brevity. Speaking in an executive way, having executive communication skills, part of it comes down to being succinct, right? So saying what you want to say in as few words as possible, and be disciplined about sticking to the new patterns, the new frameworks, the new strategies, and not kind of falling back into those old habits or those old ways. Progress takes time, but if you're consistent about it, it will happen. Trust me. So what does the future of concise communication in business look like? Well, data-driven insights, right? Businesses are going to increasingly rely on data analytics to inform communication strategies, ensuring messages are targeted and effective. We can quantify it with data. So that's going to be important, right? Thinking about a focus on visual communication, like infographics, charts, interesting visuals, visualizations can take that complex topic and turn it into something more digestible. And it'll also reduce this need for a lot of text and, just a lot of information. If you can make it visually appealing, please do that. Global collaboration, right? Our globalized society. We're going to need to rely more heavily on succinct communication so that we can be more clear and efficient, have that collaboration across languages, across cultures. Very important. And then personalized communication, always thinking about tailoring, your communication to the individual preferences. What are the expectations? How can you level set on expectations? What are some of the needs? And, what is the communication style that people kind of respond to? How can they be more receptive to what you're saying? This is going to be really more and more important as we see in the future. So if you want to continue your reading on this topic and, further enlighten yourselves, here are some books that I recommend. Okay, you can check them out. And then also we have some online courses in Explearning Academy. So we've got, the Executive Excellence Masterclass. We have a Management and Leadership course, Tone of Voice course, Nonverbal course, Speaking Model Framework course, Conflict Management course, and we have so many others, as well as more coming. So that would be something that I would highly recommend as well, in addition to these books that I've shared with you here. You can find them in the replay, so don't feel like you need to write them down, although you can if you'd like. But this will be in the replay for you, so you can definitely check that out. And our courses are on our platform at academy.explearning.co. So to wrap up here, when you are succinct and you can get to the point, you unlock a whole slew of benefits for not only yourself, but for the organizations that you're part of. And, this helps you foster clear understanding. It enhances your productivity. It boosts your morale at work and with what you do. And it also strengthens relationships and creates stronger rapport, because you can get more done, more can be said in fewer words. And it's just, all around beneficial. So that's really what the whole succinct communication is about. Of course, there's always more to talk about, and we're going to be discussing this in an executive coaching session next week. This week, we're talking about unique value propositions tomorrow. But next week, we'll talk more about succinct communication, and we'll have some, simulations and role plays and things like that where you can actually practice the strategies hands-on, because that's important. You get to do that in a low stakes setting where, you get to practice, you get feedback, and I give a whole write-up for each member who participates in the executive coaching in the live session as well as after, so you can actually go through and read it and analyze it and follow up with us about it. So it's a whole thing. And for those of you who want more of a self-study, then I really encourage you to join our self-study plan. It's a year-long communication skills boot camp. We've got live classes and webinars in there. We've got the monthly challenges and web courses. We've got live interactive chats, and we've also got the ability for live meetups with other members in the interest groups. So we have different interest groups. You get to make friends, you get to network, and this is an opportunity for you to actually practice social fluency, practice your, the strategies I teach here and we teach, and also your executive skills as well. You get to practice that as well. So those are some of the things, and you can scan this QR code here. This is the Explearning Academy self-study program. So for those of you who want, to work on your professional development and personal growth, then I highly recommend this program for you. You can take it at your own pace. You can, submit your work for feedback from our expert coaches, and that's separate from the executive coaching. But it's also a wonderful, wonderful program. And so many people have been doing it and have taken it, and you can read up all about it on our website. And this is what one of our members has to say: best investment, you won't regret it. So with that, my friends, that concludes our live lesson for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I have a message here from Elizabeth. Let's see. Regarding the pause, I believe that taking pauses is extremely important. Good. Especially when the topic is long and complicated. Yes, absolutely. Because it provides processing time, right? Not just for you, but more importantly for the people listening. However, it is very challenging when in the training session, for example, we ask questions or seek interactions and the audience remains in pause, like silent, right? Yeah, absolutely. And look, that happens, right? You ask a question to the audience and crickets maybe, or you ask them to post something in an interactive chat, crickets. This happens, it's just part of a presentation. It happens sometimes, but don't let that discourage you. Still ask your questions and maybe find a way of maybe refining it, or making people feel more at ease to ask their question. Because sometimes people, I like to remind people that this is a learning process for everybody, and you don't have to have a perfect question. There is no such thing. There's no silly question. So just being, upfront about it and saying, just, feel free to ask this question. No one's going to judge you. But of course, people have that evaluation apprehension, so you can't blame them. But, over time, and the more people know each other and, connect with each other and feel comfortable and confident, the more they will ask questions. That's just kind of human psychology, right? Okay, good. All right, well, thank you so much for joining me. Well done on investing in yourselves. Stay tuned for the replay that will come up, and also the PDF download for this presentation, which you can find in our academy at academy.explearning.co. I will see you for another webinar and live class. Thanks so much for joining me, everybody. Bye. See you next time.